very interesting topic that we now have brought for you, because as we've seen just now, especially in the early days of startups, there's continuous talk about fundraising. When is the next round starting? Have you just closed the first round? Who are your investors, etc.? And our next speaker is actually arguing that capital is not really the solution, it's not the gold standard. There are other ways, and maybe we have to talk more about access than about capital per se. He's a prominent investor, very successful entrepreneur and network builder himself. So please welcome with me on this stage, Dominik Matyka. Hi. You were already starting the conversation and the networking right there off stage. Thank you so much for being with us. So people know you from... Oh, did no one give... Oh. Simon and his gang just walk off with all the mics. And let us start where you are sitting, really at the intersection of entrepreneurship, of network and community building, of investing as well. So if there's one person to say such a statement, capital is not the solution, access it, it's probably you. But can you explain and give us a little bit of insights of what exactly do you mean by that? It may sound provocative for some of the people here.
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. I see many old friends.
Well-known faces.
DJ, one of my lawyers, one of my very first investors, an old friend, another investor of mine, etc. So it's great to be here, although I find it quite interesting not to see too many people. So I believe that startups still believe that capital is the most important thing.
Let's turn this thing around.
Well, just to give you a little bit of a background, I've, aside of starting own companies and selling them, I've started a venture capital fund called Cavalry Ventures. So we've pumped hundreds of millions into dozens of startups. And what I see is a huge difference between paper valuations and exit values. Mm-hmm. So I'm invested in, 10 plus venture capital funds myself. And I barely saw DPI, which makes the asset class per se very unrelevant to my asset allocation in general.
Interesting, okay.
And one of the things why that probably is the reason why companies get bought. And most of the companies that you see these days barely have like a deep, underlying technology stack that is relevant, or patents or what's or not, especially in the internet tech sector. Mm-hmm. Some don't have relevant market share, which basically makes them very unattractive for being bought by others. And most of them are just hunting, fundraising after fundraising to somehow grow. And what we see these days is, the appetite for investors to invest into companies have dramatically changed. So you do need to see some sort of level of already, first success, which in most cases comes down to, when you like to measure it in ARR, to let's say 200, 300, 400, 500,000 in ARR. And this basically happens due to the founders having their very first initial great contacts, people, old colleagues, old friends doing favors towards them, but not making, hardcore sales or networking. And I believe that capital in general is just buying time, which is in some cases important because you need time to develop your product, but access, buys momentum. So every company that I take a look these days, I basically look if there is a way to, reduce customer acquisition costs down to zero, to make existing customers becoming ambassadors to sell the product. I don't want to call it viral, but I barely believe that in these days you can fight against, big corporations, big American guys having tons of hundreds of billions of dollars by doing marketing, no matter how automated it is. So you need to make sure that you have a network that is trusted, that is vetted, that brings you into the position, that doors get opened easier. Why? Because most products aren't unique. No matter how big your USP is, your products aren't unique. There's always somebody that will have a very comparable product. And especially in B2B, I do see company buying decisions that are not happening on the product's USPs, but on the level of quality of introductions or the trust level of buyer and seller. So having this, vetted relationship being bought, is way more important than pumping money into sales reps to try to open doors that you won't make a deal anyways.
Mm-hmm. Is that then in the end also a pledge for a different kind of company building than we've seen before? Because, there were a lot of occasions where you felt like it was a really blown up type of company, but then the value really wasn't there for the price that you pay. Remember how Warren Buffett said it's the price that you pay, but it's the value that you get. So is that about different types of company building per se?
Well, you can't generalize, and I'm not a huge fan of generalizing, although I do it quite often. When it comes to company building, I'm a huge fan of bootstrapping, because bootstrapping makes you invest into into features, into products, into developments that you can really prioritize. Mm-hmm. I do have companies in my portfolio that have raised 100, 200, 500 million of dollars, and when you have so much money, you tend to grow independently of logic. It sounds a little bit weird, but having a great valuation on paper just makes potentially your founders through secondaries and your early angel investors successful economically, but will not make any investor successfully, or economically successful. So I'm a huge fan of bootstrapping in a way where you find your solid proposition, where you find your solid go-to-market, etc. And on the other hand side, and this is something unrelated to my earlier point, is AI, and it's kind of truth. And I see three things that I personally believe are dramatically changing the way how investors are perceiving companies. Mm-hmm. A, nobody can predict, and due to the fact that they can't predict, they won't invest or buy your company, how AI is going to change your model in 10 years from now. Mm. So I have seen friends of mine running great companies with tens of millions of EBIT that would have been valued hundreds of millions of dollars 3 years ago, but barely can sell their company on a 6 times multiple on EBIT these days because the financial sponsors can't predict the trajectory of those companies in future, which is a completely new setup. B, there is a huge trend, and we have informed all our portfolio around that you should ask yourself, how is your client stack going to be replaced by AI in years' time? So it's not about you running a successful business and you building up a solid customer basis. But if your customer basis is going to be replaced by AI in future, means that you will be dealing with agents and not human beings, which eventually, decreases the value of lock-in from an, personal relationship perspective, which investors don't like. Mm-hmm. And C, you of course see those movements of open claw and comparables. There's just like this one guy starts to build his company, he reaches millions of dollars in revenue, and evidently he will never raise venture capital, right? So the market is fundamentally changing. I'm not an ambassador for AI as many others are, so I don't believe that this will change all our way of thinking or doing things. But I'm just saying that from a macroeconomic perspective, financial sponsors when it comes to private equity, venture capitalists when it comes to new fundraising, so first-time investing, and founders are rethinking the way on how to start, build, and grow their businesses fundamentally.
What would be your top 3 advice then with regard to what kind of access, what kind of earlier access founders have to strategically really think about and act upon, especially then in the age of AI?
I made some notes and just to remind myself, so I believe that networking in general is seen too much transactionally, especially in Germany. So I do you a favor if I can expect a favor back, which I believe is the very first wrong pitch. Second of all, I believe that great networking or great relationship building starts with you offering your help towards somebody that is not expecting you to help him. So instead of asking for help, offer your help. And I think it's a very easy way of doing things, right? And I'll give you a very easy example. So I'm sitting in the board of many companies, invested in many companies, having huge of a network, and I'm getting asked by, those C-levels, hey, Dominik, can you do me an introduction into this, Bentley Motors CMO or this XYZ CEO? And I'm just like, fuck, I haven't talked to that person for 5 years. I barely know them. So I have still my people that, do the introduction in my name towards them. And you know what happens? And this surprises me a lot. I receive an email back. Hey, Dominik, it's so great to hear from you. Thank you so much for thinking of us, etc., etc. And this reminds me all the time that networking is about, connecting people, connecting relevancies without demanding anything. So I'm just bringing two people together where I initially have a huge belief that it might add value towards the introduced party without demanding anything. And it keeps my networking alive because, running my own company probably at that stage of time doesn't have any reason why I should be approaching that person, let's say, of, Rolls-Royce Motors or whomever. I just don't have any deals with them. But using this bridge of having somebody that is interested in being connected to them, I use to keep my network alive. So my key professional advice: start offering help. Don't ask for anything. And if you do, karma will come back. And I'm not a huge karma fan, right?
Question though, because I think the underlying factor of being able to do those introduction is that you have a very, very strong reputation in the market. You have like 25,000 people following you on LinkedIn, etc. You have built a lot and you've done it successfully. So there is a reputation for probably not being the one who makes like a nonsense introduction. But if you're a startup that has really just started, you have no track record, you came straight from uni, how do you build that reputation? How much self-marketing is involved? How do you go about even being able to make those introductions, offering your help?
Well, the very first thing is, people don't care about borrowed power. So go to your LinkedIn, take a look at your tagline, and if it says X McKinsey, X BCG, X Zalando, X whatever, get rid of that, because you're just still trying to borrow power that you don't have anymore. Nobody really cares. I find it more or less pitiful to read, your reputational mistakes around those companies that you've worked for, not around building your own one, right? So I think that visibility should not be compared to proximity. So I have 25,000 in LinkedIn, but it's probably 15,000, that I don't even know, but I have 50,000 in my contact book, So that's more important to build close relationships by, having, in these days, I would say it's better to have 10 people that trust you, that advocate for you, that will do anything for you, that having, 1,000 clicks or 150,000 impressions on a LinkedIn post. I've told myself, and this is how my own, private network now started. So I run almost 1,000 people investors network, which is probably like the most active one in the DACH region. And it started by, and I'd like to share this story because it kind of was fundamentally changing the way I do business or see myself doing business. I had a PR agency. I wanted to stop working, actually, just doing some, board seat roles. And I wasn't a board type of person because I've started my own companies. I was running the MXCO. I've started a venture capital fund, had my family office. So I was what Germans would say a kind fish or Fleisch. So I did not have a very crystal clear position. So I've hired an agency, a reputational PR agency, and telling them, hey, make me look like a board. I just want to do board seats. But I didn't have any topics that they could make usage of to position me in media as a board member. So one day we sit together in a jour fixe and they ask me like, hey, what were you doing last week? And I say, nothing of fucking importance for you guys to make me being positioned as a board member. What were you doing? And I was like, well, I was, talking to my lawyers about wealth transfer from our family office to the children. I have 2 small children. And that was pretty much it. And they go like, oh, super interesting topic. And I was like, I have no idea how that topic relates to me being, seen as bored. But well, I don't care, write whatever. So they start writing an article, wealth or money, you can versaufen, ja, verschenken oder vererben. Ja, you can have different ways on spending your money. But it was more or less a typical, let's say, LinkedIn-alike, ego-driven, ego-shooter, I'm a cool kind of person, what's so not, bullshit, bingo, ChatGPT-driven posting. And I said, I don't like it. It has absolutely no fucking value to the readers, but probably to the LinkedIn algorithms to position me as somebody that knows something. So I said, no, we won't do that way. We will actually invite people to a workshop that I might be offering. So I had so much knowledge around that topic because I've spent weeks and months talking to lawyers and other people on structural inefficiencies and possibilities on how to do this wealth transfer that I just said, just for my karma points, I just like to offer that knowledge to other people if interested. I thought that there's going to be 4 or 5 people applying for the workshop, and we had 150. Big boys applying to that topic because they've believed that gaining knowledge from somebody that is not asking for anything. I wasn't charging them. I wasn't a consultant, neither a lawyer. I was not expecting anything from them, but wanted to share my knowledge and probably get a little bit of peer-to-peer exchange. And that trust basically, translated in now being a vetted network of 700 of those people, acting like a peer-to-peer network or a vetted virtual family office with the preliminary course of saying, geben ist das neue nehmen. And if you start working that way, you'll get so much back, it's unfucking believable. So this would be my key advice. Don't ask me for money, give me your solution for free to be promoted to my members.
I think one interesting or potentially interesting thought just came to my mind, because I think in networking, your own identity in this ecosystem is mostly attached to who you're venturing out for as a company, right? Hypothesis. You are ARX Robotics, you are Cusp Capital, you name it. Is it maybe a difference if you're looking more inwards towards your personal strengths and who you are as a person, not necessarily attached to who you are representing at the moment?
No, I completely disagree. Things that I observe, talking to many, many people, is that most people can't sell themselves. Well, there might be people that are in industries that are not very, geeky or funny or medially, provocatively cool positioned. There might be people that are introverted per se. But take that. Every single conversation that you have is a sales pitch.
Right.
Not a sales pitch on your business if the counterparty doesn't fit in running a business. It might be one into you as a person. So people ask me then like, but what might that be? I can't. So ask people just a very simple question. Is there anything where I can be of help to you?
Yep.
And every one of us, me included, we do have hundreds of thousands of problems. We obviously start to think about the business-related ones. But there is private ones. Finding the right kindergarten for the school, deciding on the next car, talking about vacation, what's so not. If you start building relationships, you have to find common denominators in whatever area.
Perfect.
So you should always be open to at least offering your help, to trying to find out if that person that you're talking to is willing and able to open up themselves, become vulnerable. Because if you have somebody becoming vulnerable, you can then so easily close that relationship by getting them the right advice or sharing the right experience. So take every single discussion into a sales pitch, every single one.
No, then we're actually on the same page, I think, with regards to that. So tell us a little bit more about access, and if we're talking access, we're talking clients, customers, but also potentially access to communities or networks such as yours, the BCD network. Is that correct? And what role do they play in the ecosystem, in your opinion?
Could you reframe the question so I can give a...
Okay, it's actually two questions. So first, what kind of access are we talking about when it's not capital? So is it mostly customers, is it partners, etc.? And then second, we go back to your community. What role do communities and access to such communities that are often very exclusive are playing in that whole game that we're talking about?
It's many questions, and everything is, of course, intercorrelated, intersected somehow. So I personally believe that most people do something wrong, and I do it too. We misunderstand context, right? So knowing the context of anything, it might be a WhatsApp group, it might be this conference stage, and matching expectations towards offering is probably the key where people are mismatching, So I have absolutely no idea what you have expected from me saying, or what, and I'm just trying to give you experience sharings and topics from my observations, my experiences that made me successful, so you can take anything out as a go-home value, right? I personally believe that our network per se started and is still a wealth community. So there's a couple of things that I personally like to stress. So we are having a hard door, like a club. Let's imagine Berghain. Who of you guys is from Berlin? Anyone from Berlin? Berghain, warst du schon mal da? So Berghain has a quite, aggressive door policy. And our network is a little bit like Berghain, So on the one hand side, what is the door about? The door is all about homogeneity. So you like to have similar, like-minded people to be in the club. Although they pray diversity, but you have a diversity on a different level. Second of all, it's a little bit hard to get in if you don't, if you don't get to the factors which they have decided for that make you allowed to go into the club. So some entry barriers that you have. Our entry barrier is wealth limits, because I believe if you have a certain wealth, you don't need to sell anything anymore. So when I've started running my own companies 20 years ago, I was trying to sell those companies anywhere to everybody just to make revenue. I don't need to do it anymore. And if you don't need to do it anymore, and if you just open up differently without having, the necessity of making revenue, it opens up so many possibilities on doing great business together, because people in general, although I'm a marketer, they don't like to be sold. Who of you guys likes to be sold? Who likes marketing? Who likes advertisement? We don't, per se. But we like to create value. We like to be visionary. We like to move forward. And moving forward together with others with the same kind of mindset is great. When it comes to, the support and the access people have, of course, there's different categories. So our platform is very much driven around club investments, co-deals. I always tend to say that we see every single investment, every single private investment that there is out there which doesn't have an ISIN. So alles WKN-lose. Yeah? Not necessarily related too much to startups, right? But to private debt, to infra, to secondaries, to SPVs, to what so not. And this is just due to the fact that people are offering a co-investment and are not looking to fundraise. It comes down eventually to the same kind of, result. But I always make sure that people stick to a sort of a code of conduct that we have defined for the group. And one very easy thing is disclaiming your own benefit. Nobody would, argue against you making money on a deal that you have found, on a topic that you've brought up to the group, on a value that you provide, if you transparently disclaim the value that is potentially exponentially higher towards you than to the guys taking on this deal. And if you don't do, you do it once, and then nobody's going to trust you anymore, because they're always going to believe you are benefiting from that more than the guys that you're offering it to. So I believe that, having transparency, having honesty, having Prussian values, is something that is in this society these days lacking the most. Aside to something that I these days proclaim to be the shittiest thing that is happening currently. Yeah, it's hard to translate. Verbindlichkeit.
You don't like Verbindlichkeit.
I love Verbindlichkeit.
What is that? Reliability or
yeah, accuracy, reliability. So if you say A, fucking do A. I've been on parties. I was drunk. I committed to an investment. Next morning, I woke up and I said, not the coolest thing. It still was an okay-ish investment, and it wasn't a big ticket, But I've committed my verbal yes in front of others to that guy, and I then did the investment.
Do you feel like we have a culture of non-commitment?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
She's offering. Oh, she's starting the game.
But it's a
Hello.
good pitch line. Yeah. But no, it's really important. There is even people asking me for help, which I like to offer, although not having time. And they write me in WhatsApp or an email, whatever. I'm gonna call you this afternoon, and I'm just like, fuck, I don't have time. And they then don't call me. So that's the worst of the worst, right? Yeah. So they want something from you, tell you that they're gonna call. So please, you will lose me immediately if you tell me A and then do B or not do anything. And you're losing most of the people because we don't have time. Time is the biggest constraint in our lives when it comes to our families, when it comes to prioritizing what we do from a business perspective. So we need to sort of find out ways to act more efficiently. Right. And the only efficient way of acting is to rely on the word of others. That is going completely missing these days. And I find it as one of the worst evolutions that I currently observe.
All right. We'll keep that in mind to keep committing to those things we have committed to. I would like to open up the floor since we already started the discussion here, first row, just to see if there is any, yes, and some hands is going up. Johannes is here around. Oh, yes, just next to it there. Please.
Hi, Dominik. I'm reading that capital is not the solution and the access is. But the thing is, even to have an access, don't I have a capital? Because, for example, if I want to take you for a coffee, I need a capital first.
Thanks, yes.
And the second question I want to ask, which you mentioned about positioning, that you hired a PR firm to position you in some way. So are you suggesting in some way that make it until you, fake it until you make it to the young founders, which is pretty very easy in the world of ChatGPT? So that's the two questions I want to ask.
Thank you so much. Let's start with the first question.
Yeah, I would like to answer the second one, which is kind of very hard to say because it changed a lot, but I would primarily say yes. But even if I say no, people will fake it until they make it because it's a natural thing of doing when you run a startup. But it really depends on the type of startup that you're running, right? And ChatGPT doesn't help me to understand if you faked it. I kind of read it in the things that you say.
Yeah.
So
maybe though, I mean, how I understood your PR agency works was also to make visible some things that you didn't even yourself thought of as an asset. So maybe it's not necessarily about faking it, but just about finding out. Maybe there's so much more to yourself than you currently think, right? So if you do your own little SWOT analysis, maybe on the strength side, there's some things that you never thought of could be put forward as a value that you can offer to others.
No, absolutely. When it was about the PR agency doing the work for me, I was a board member in many companies already. I'm still a board member, but it just was one job out of 10 that I have. So I always tended to say that Sebastian from Handelsblatt didn't call me for a statement, or rarely called me for a statement when it came down to what so not, because the what so not was just one vertical out of 10 that I was basically standing for or serving, right? So he basically called the one that was just standing for this one vertical because it immediately made more sense for him. To your first question, you said you need capital to buy a coffee. Is that correct?
You need capital to access capital.
So he said to buy a coffee.
No, it was about the access to the community. So, for example, that only when you've really made it, you'll be able to access a community such as BCD.
Yeah. So my very key advice, I receive, I'd say, I haven't counted them, but hundreds of pitches via LinkedIn. You know to how many I reply? 0. Why? Because I believe that although a founder should be very, fond on fundraising and have sort of a good skill set in fundraising, I like him to understand that any type of conversation, discussion, especially when it's becoming monetary, is something that is vetted around trust. And you doing a cold approach towards me builds on no trust at all. What could? Finding one common friend of ours. So I met one friend of mine. I would call him a friend, although I call many people a friend. But I met somebody today, and we share a common friend for 20 years. So I already sort of, I naturally felt aligned with that person, although not knowing that person. And I would really, give you the advice of whomever you like to approach, try to find the pre-vetted trust level from somebody else, especially in fundraising. This is, in many cases, also the reason why business angels are there, are eager to exist, because they have been building their networks for dozens of years. You basically piggyback their existing trust level to others who potentially are stupid, and that's why they don't talk to you, because you have the greatest solution on earth, potentially are overwhelmed by the billions of approaches they get and filter you out, which might also be a mistake. But whatever it is, you need to think, what's the highest conversion on what I would like to achieve? And you get the highest conversion by piggybacking trusted relationships. And it's a very easy thing, right? So make sure that somebody that I trust approaches me, so I at least take a look at your business, and then if I like it, although I might not be investing, connect you to somebody else. So it's an one-to-one relationship that follows on. It's like multi-level marketing.
Does that answer your question? I think we do still have this, the challenge that I hear you saying about wanting to access high net worth networks when you're not there. The question is maybe then for Dominik, would you recommend then almost maybe creating your own network, or finding those networks and communities that are there for you where you're currently standing?
No. There's also 2 mistakes that I see quite often, from my portfolio. There is portfolio founders approaching me, hey, can you do me an introduction to the CEO of Siemens? I'm just like, the guy is not fucking interested in your business. So you need to be in the position of crystal clearly defining the context, the reason why, and an easy what's the next step approach when trying to find the right contact partner that you like to talk. Most people can't. Do you know somebody from the insurance sector? 10,000 people. You know what my problem is? I don't want to think on how you should be doing your sales. Dominik, could you introduce me to the senior director of Munich Re in what's or not his name is ABC? Sure, I can. Can you send me your boiler? Yes, I will. Deal done. I have thought 3 seconds. You have converted to your goal. Most people are not contextualizing what they like. So most people also overrate their proposition in the context of, demand of their counterparties. So you need to understand very easily that any C-level in any DAX corporate, is not dealing with problems less than 50 million euro. And you are telling them, I'm running an enterprise, super great solution, it costs up to 1.5 million a year. It's too little. They don't care. Right? So make sure not to strive for Bill Gates, yeah, or for Elon Musk when you want to deal with Tesla, but to find somebody who approaches you, you know, who gives you a relationship to somebody that might eventually be the one that is in power of position of, you know, confirming to the deal that you're looking for.
Fantastic. We have to close it. We're already running over time, but can you please put your hands together for Dominik Matyka and the insights that you shared today? Thank you so much. Highly appreciate it. Are you going to be around for a little bit today?
Yeah, half an hour, but you can all add me on LinkedIn, and if you come up with a very crystal clear,
very precise,
how can I help you? I'm willing to help. If it's not clear, then I'm not even going to respond.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.